Return of the Mount Hua Sect.
This! Teeth clenched hard enough to shatter at any moment. Fists tight enough to draw dark red blood. Trembles and convulsions that couldn't be controlled. Anger. Anger enough to turn his hair white. Red. Everything was red. Everything before his eyes was stained scarlet with blood. The lush green mountain peak was stained blood red. Its very nature was swept away in a single day. Death. All that was left was death. What purpose did all this bloodshed serve? Chung Myung clawed at the hilt of the sword embedded in his shoulder, drawing out the broken length of the Plum Blossom Sword. His left arm was gone. Only the torn scraps of his sleeve flapped in the wind. His legs were unwounded, yet he could barely move. His stomach gaped open with a hole the size of an infant's head. And yet Chung Myung couldn't feel the pain. The pain of his body was nothing compared to the turmoil in his heart. 장문사 형. He discovered the discarded corpse of the sect leader of Mount Hua. Why was it so unfair? Why were the dead unable to even close their eyes? 사제. 사제 Chung-gong's bisected body part haunted him. Everyone was dead. 사질's. All of Mount Hua's best and brightest, who had promised to climb the mountain together, to safeguard their territory, to spread their names far and wide, had departed to a place from which they could not return, and their sajils followed them. Chung Myung clenched his teeth. Theirs was a noble sacrifice. Their death was just and glorious. But who would dare praise their deaths? Who would dare? Chung Myung's gaze locked on to the perpetrator, the one who had roused his unfathomable rage, the demon from the skies, the leader of the Heavenly Demon Sect, the Heavenly Demon. The sight of this despicable man sat cross-legged in the sea of blood and gore evoked strange emotions in Chung Myung. Even in this hellish scene, the Heavenly Demon appeared supremely serene. No, serenity didn't suit him now. Dozens of swords pierced his body and 2 spears pierced his stomach. Everyone had spent their lives to topple that demon. The battle between the final squad, consisting only of the elite of the sects, and the Heavenly Demon ended in annihilation. Was it satisfactory? Would the dead rest peacefully? They would not. Even if they did, Chung Myung couldn't. It took everything he had left to stop the rage from stealing his rationality. The Heavenly Demon's pale, empty eyes opened to gaze into the blue sky. Sect Mount Hua. 3 words spilled from his lips. The words eternally inscribed on Chung Myung's heart now emerged from the demon's mouth. How unfortunate, disciple of Mount Hua. If only you could get out of here. You could boast of your achievements. Shut your disgusting mouth! You can still be proud of your actions. With the help of countless people, your sword finally reached my body. Shut up! Chung Myung's stomach churned just from hearing the name of his sect from that wretched mouth. How unfortunate. The Heavenly Demon was dying. Even as the greatest demon in all of time, he cannot survive his danjeon breaking and his organs being ruined. Terminal lucidity. His appearance was nothing more than his last gasps of life. But why? Why did the dying man seem so relaxed? Chunma was incomprehensible to Chung Myung. If I were given just one more day, I would have truly become a being worthy of the name Heavenly Demon. This is fate as well. Chung Myung gripped the sword he pulled out of his shoulder. The sharply forged blade cut his palm. One step. Another step. At the end of a long and terrible war, Chung Myung limped towards the Heavenly Demon. Remember this, disciple of Mount Hua. Chunma's eyes seemed devoid of emotion, even as Chung Myung approached. This is not the end. The demons will return, and when that happens, the world will be conquered by the demons. The demons can never be stopped. The Heavenly Demon's head fell to the ground. Chung Myung crushed the head of the Heavenly Demon, eyes still open. The war was over. The world would remember their victory. But Chung Myung knew there was no victory here. No one won this war. Finally, Chung Myung no longer had the strength to stand. His inevitable death was coming. Chung Myung raised his head to the sky. Even after such bloodshed, the sky was still blue, as if indifferent to the happenings of earth.
What will happen to the Mount Hua Sect?
Everyone who climbed the mountain was dead. Even if anyone had survived, they were probably on their last breaths. No clan had suffered as much as Mount Hua.
장문사형, I told you. Don't give your all in every task,
He'd said. Now, Mount Hua would be buried on this mountain. All the disciples had followed their masters to death. All that was left were the children who knew nothing about Mount Hua. And regret. It was regret. Was there any meaning to what happened? Did the spilled blood of Mount Hua mean anything?
I don't know anymore. 장문사.
Chung Myung fell onto his side. His pure white robes, painted with a 5-leaf plum blossom, splayed out before his eyes. Innocent death. A lonely end with no witnesses. The great Plum Blossom Sword Saint of Mount Hua was dying like a dog.
But your death was better than mine.
Because there was someone to weep for you. Chung Myung wept for them.
I'm sorry, 장문사형.
Chung Myung's vision faded. If he had devoted a little more of his time to training, would he have been able to save at least one person? If he had listened to his teachers and their scolding? If he had truly obtained the Mount Hua sword instead of the Plum Blossom sword? No regrets. But it was all regret. All he had left was regrets. And worries for the sect. Plum blossoms are meant to fall. And after the cold winter comes spring. Mount Hua. The 13th disciple of the great Mount Hua Sect, the Plum Blossom Sword Saint Chung Myung, who slayed the Heavenly Demon at the summit of the 100,000 mountains of the Heavenly Demon Sect, drifted into eternal sleep. This short anecdote was his only legacy.
Chapter 1. A dream? No. He didn't know if it was a dream or a memory or a hallucination as he danced on the edge of death. He didn't know if he was already dead, dying, or still alive. All he could see was the past, childhood memories, his appearance from when he first entered the Mount Hua Sect, the scenes of training with Sahyung, the time he'd fled strict sect rules and gone to see the world. Before a warrior, you are a practitioner. You must realize that power without ethics is just violence. Nagging, constant nagging. It bored him. While he was a disciple of Mount Hua, he didn't fully follow the teachings. Despite his natural talent, which earned him the title of Plum Blossom Sword Saint, he was but a mere beginner in the Mount Hua Sect. Why didn't he realize earlier? Even when the teachings didn't make sense, even when he felt out of place, everything that made him him, he owed solely to the Mount Hua Sect. That was why he admired the sect so much. He realized too late for regrets. If only he'd paid a little more attention to the teachings, if only he was a little bit stronger, he might have been able to change that bitter ending. If only he... Do you regret your decisions? Chung Myung heard the soft voice of his 장문사형, his father, his older brother, his family. This man was Chung Myung's goal. He wanted to follow him until the very end, but it was too late for that too. Yes, I regret it. I regret it so much, Sahyung. There is no need for regret. His voice exuded warmth. It is the Mount Hua Sect after all. Sahyung. It seemed to Chung Myung that Sahyung was chuckling, forever warm and benevolent. Because it is Mount Hua Sect. Tak. Even then, Puck. Huh? What? It hurts! My head! I don't get it! What kind of pain is this? Is this what it feels like when your limbs are cut off? Heavenly Demon? Is that bastard not dead yet? Chung Myung instinctively raised his hand to protect his head. If he wasn't dead yet, these attacks would finish him off for good. Heavenly Demon? But the voice that answered him wasn't the Heavenly Demon, but a thick, sniveling voice he didn't recognize. Huh? When he opened his eyes, the face was equally unfamiliar. A beggar? Beggar. A beginner, judging by the knot tied around his waist. He just started. A beggar among beggars. The beggar with the grumpy, scruffy face eyed Chung Myung. What is this? He couldn't understand what was happening. Heavenly Demon, yeah, right. The beggar's face flushed red with irritation. You lazy bum, still sleep talking. Everyone else has gone off to beg, but you're still here sleeping like you did something great. Yeah, do I make you laugh, huh? The beggar hefted his bamboo stick. Hold on, is this kid threatening me right now? Huh? The beggar was startled by Chung Myung's sudden smirk. It was an odd situation, but he didn't feel like he needed to bother with context. Just who was Chung Myung after all? He handily ranked among the top 3 of all the numerous swordsmen in the world. People praised his sword style as the true essence of Mount Hua and dubbed him the Plum Blossom Sword Saint. The 2 other great swordsmen weren't even worthy of being his opponents. Even the Heavenly Demon, in his final moments, acknowledged Chung Myung's swordsmanship. Disciples and sect leaders alike bowed before him. But this beggar was making a threat? A threat? Huh? Are you laughing now? Look here, kid. Look here? I'm struggling to understand the situation, but for starters, you can put that thing down. The beggar could only laugh. Chung Myung scowled. How dare he react to him like this? And then the beggar smacked Chung Myung with his bamboo stick. Huh? Chung Myung was dumbfounded. How dare a mere beggar do something like this, knowing who I am? No matter what happened, I'm going to fix this beggar's attitude before the day is up. First, let me stop that baton. Chung Myung raised his right arm. What? Huh? Slow. Why are my arms so slow? The baton was flying towards him, but Chung Myung's hand were yet able to reach for the baton in time. It made no sense. With my speed, I should already be holding that stick. Maybe it was because of my injuries. Then all I have to do is move on to my guts. Huh? What's that? On the edge of his vision, he saw a small hand appear, moving towards the baton at a snail's pace. Too slow and too short. Huh? Hands that small can't stop it. This isn't going to work. The stick landed squarely on Chung Myung's head. Chung Myung collapsed to the ground convulsing. All of his thoughts were driven away by the skull-splitting pain. Chung Myung clutched his head and rolled over. Even his arm being ripped off hadn't hurt like this. You bastard! The beggar laid into him in earnest. Situation? Understand the situation? Oh, I'll do that. But I'll make sure you understand the situation first. If you go crazy, you go crazy. Stupid bastard. Did the heat rot your brain? The medicine for heat is getting hit, you bastard. You crazy beggar! Stop right now! If not, die! It hurts! Chung Myung's cry changed little by little as he was beaten. You bastard! I won't let this go! I'll make sure to rip you! Smack! Stop! Stop it now, please! You jerk! Smack! Why are you hitting me? Smack! You beggar! Sorry! The whipping continued with no remorse. Save! Smack! Spare me! As if to tell him there were no free second chances, Chung Myung was immediately beaten to a pulp. The damage to my pride! Chung Myung pulled out the piece of cloth he jammed into his nose. The moment he saw the red stains, Chung Myung's face fell. A nosebleed. Not even a nosebleed from internal injuries, but a nosebleed from being beaten. How did that even make sense? It wasn't just the nosebleed. Nothing had made sense since he opened his eyes. To say nothing of his bruised eyelids, it felt like nowhere on his body was left untouched. Beating someone that thoroughly had to be something of an art form. If someone hadn't stopped him, he would have just kept going. Had he ever been hit like this in his entire life? Despite all the pranks he had pulled off in the famously strict Mount Hua, he had never been beaten this badly. To suffer such humiliation for the first time at the hands of a beggar! I'm gonna mess him up, that bastard. I'll tear him down. The anger and irritation rolled inside him. Chung Myung laid on the ground. If he acted on a whim, he would only hurt his battered body. No, rather than that. Chung Myung heaved himself up and stared into the river. An unfamiliar young face greeted him. When Chung Myung contorted his face, the young man did too. When Chung Myung sighed, the young man did too. What is going on here? Why is there a kid's face in the water? No, it was a nice face. The change in his face didn't bother him. After all, the younger the better, no? But it was too young, although better younger than older. Besides, no matter how much he compared them, this face was a lot more charming and handsome than the old Chung Myung. He had no complaints about the new face, but he was dissatisfied with the fact that his body was younger too. Short. The limbs were short, not because he was naturally short or something, but because he was a child. Even worse, he was all skin and bones. Even now, he was too tired and hungry to lift a hand. Whatever. So, in summary, this means I'm alive. Maybe I wasn't appropriate. No matter how hard he looked, his appearance looked nothing like the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, Chung Myung. The Sword Saint was gone. His soul and all his memories now resided in the body of a child beggar. This must be the devil's work. Or maybe it was Buddhist reincarnation. Had he known this beforehand, he would have joined Shaolin instead of Mount Hua. He wondered if the Heavenly Demon had used some kind of disgusting magic on him. But if he could perform such feats, he would already be ruling the entire world. Chung Myung didn't really care what had happened, but he had to admit that everything around him was real. This was neither a dream nor fantasy. His entire body throbbed with pain. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Nothing will change if I keep sitting around and thinking about it. First, I need to figure out what's happening and what exactly happened. Chung Myung hopped up and ran to the beggar's tent. Or he tried to run at least. Within a couple of steps, he fell. You sure did a number on me, you goddamn beggar. Chung Myung's eyes rolled angrily. No matter what happens, I'll make sure to pay you back for this. Death wasn't about to fix his dirty personality.
Chapter 2. No matter how I look at it, he seemed to have gone mad. Gu Chil gazed seriously down at Chung Myung. Did all that beating drive him mad? He got hit a little harder than usual. Although Wang Cho was usually a little excessive, he'd beaten Chung Myung like he was trying to teach him a lesson. Even getting attacked by a dog wouldn't mess him up this bad. The people who normally tried to stop him didn't even bother today, seeing how Wang Cho had absolutely manhandled Chung Myung. Gu Chil wasn't surprised. So what you're saying is, I'm a beggar? Was he beaten on his head or his body? A beggar asking if he was a beggar? What madness is this? Gu Chil was certain. This guy had turned weird. No, he had turned horrifyingly weird. He normally slacked off, so Gu Chil knew that one day he was going to get a real beating. It was just bad luck that today was the day. That was the iron rule of the Beggars' Union. If you don't find food with your own hands, you either die a dog's death, starve to death, or get beaten. Normally, people would come back to their senses after their beating. Normally. Instead, the complete opposite was happening in front of Gu Chil. Is it true? Am I really living in a place like this? It can't be true. Are you blind or what? Huh? It shouldn't be hard to figure it out by looking at what you're wearing. Chung Myung lowered his eyes. He saw all kinds of fabrics and rags. It should have been normal clothing, but they were rags. Any normal person would nod their head and go back to work, but not Chung Myung. Don't I have a name or something? Since when did beggars have names? Gu Chil heaved a sigh. Just a crude one. You're Cho Sam. Sounds like a beggar's name. Look, even the name was poor. To be a beggar, this kind of beggar. The other beggar stared blankly at him. An age. Am I around 16? Since when did beggars keep track of their age? That makes sense. Unlike everything else, everything about Cho Sam had changed. From the way he spoke to the way he moved. On top of that, he had no idea what was happening around him. It was far too much to be caused by concussion. Then, what year is it? Beggars count the days. You ever seen a beggar who counted the years? Sounds like a true beggar. Gu Chil rubbed his eyes. A beggar's life was always tired and stressful, but this was so much worse than usual. Then let me ask you a question. You've been asking for a while now. Do you know who the Heavenly Demon is? You were mumbling about the Heavenly Demon earlier too. Why are you suddenly looking for him? Answer me first. Of course I know him. Everyone knows. He was the great demon leader of the Heavenly Demon Sect who was defeated 100 years ago. What? The great demonic... Cho Sam shot forward and grabbed Gu Chil by the collar. 100 years have passed since the Heavenly Demon was slain? 100 years?
Does that really mean a century has passed since then? A century? That's right. Seems like Chosam got hit real hard.
Tell me the truth. Don't even think about lying.
What good would come out of lying to you?
Guchil pulled Chosam off of him. Soon, Chosam's freed hands were scratching furiously at his head.
He's gone mad.
There was no other explanation after seeing that. He wasn't confused or rattled by the beating. He just lost his mind. Guchil had never seen someone's face express so many shades of shock.
100 years, you say? Do you want me to say it again?
I need to head back. Chung Myung raised his head to the sky. He thought that seeing the clean blue sky would offer him some kind of comfort, but all he could see was the black ceiling of the tent. It was as dark as Chung Myung's mood. 100 years have passed since then.
Guchil snapped. It's not like you're old or something, so why do you keep repeating the same thing? It's been 100 years. The sects had a big fight with the Heavenly Demon on top of the 100,000 mountains and took his head off, right? It was 100 years ago.
I get it. That was why he was so depressed. The guy who thrashed Chung Myung earlier seemed like he was high-ranked. In that sense, the guy in front of him now could also be higher ranked than Chosam. In the Beggars' Union, was he? Unfortunately, it wasn't anything great. It was practically impossible for the Beggars' Union to feed and shelter all of their people. It was said that the union took in all beggars, but their funds were limited. Most of the Beggars' Union were plain street beggars. The higher-ups gave them numbers for names, and their clothes had no knots. Roaming on the streets, these beggars would have a better idea of what happened in the world of martial arts than any practitioner. Guchil's words were reliable. Crazy. 100 years, huh? Everything would have changed. Now, it was just a matter of accepting he'd been reincarnated into the body of another child. Why couldn't I have just been reborn right after my death? After 100 years, everyone who knew Chung Myung must be dead. That aside, all the people he'd known died on top of the horrible mountain. He was all alone. No matter how twisted things can get, this is just too much. Then the Mount Hua... Aha! Hold on! The Mount Hua Sect? When Chosam hopped up from the floor and started shouting at him, Guchil wasn't even surprised anymore. The Mount Hua Sect! What happened to the Mount Hua Sect?
What do you mean?
What happened to Mount Hua?
Mount Hua?
Yes!
What's Mount Hua?
Huh? Chung Myung boggled at him. He didn't know Mount Hua? A beggar didn't know? Come on, don't play with me. What's the current situation of the Mount Hua Sect? Mount Hua Sect? Guchil tilted his head. He really didn't know. Really? About Mount Hua? The one of the great 9 sects. Mount Hua Sect. You don't know about it? Huh, you...
One of the great 9 sects? What nonsense are you spouting? There is no Mount Hua in the great 9 sects.
There isn't? Shaolin, Wudang, Zhongnam, Dianchang, Gongtong, Qingcheng, Emei, Hainan, Kunlun, and the Beggars' Union.
There are 10 now.
Hainan? Those good-for-nothing bastards are in the 10 great sects? No, that doesn't matter. Then Mount Hua isn't one of them? Guchil sighed. Chosam only heard what he wanted to, no matter what he said. Guchil's patience was wearing thin. Mount Hua Sect isn't part of the great sects? No, that could be possible. But you don't know Mount Hua? Even when a rich man becomes poor, he can last for 3 years with his luxuries. But you, a mere beggar, don't know about the great Mount Hua Sect? Calling him a beggar didn't really capture the consequences of what he said. Well, he could starve to death. Does that make any sense? Chung Myung shook Guchil by the shoulders. Any sense at all? You really don't know Mount Hua? Mount Hua! Mount Hua Sect! Mount Hua! Guchil could feel a headache setting in. Right! Mount Hua! Come to think of it, Guchil tilted his head. I remember hearing there was such a sect in the Shaanxi province. Yes, that's right! Mount Hua in Shanxi! Chung Myung's eyes were wide.
From what I know, they're in ruins.
What? Chung Myung's heart stopped.
I don't know if there was a Mount Hua sect in the great sects or not, but I heard stories about how their elite warriors were killed in the war with the Heavenly Demon. I don't know for sure. If you want to know more, ask the others.
What did that mean? Mount Hua Sect has fallen? Mount Hua? The Mount Hua Sect? This beggar, feeding me lies! Guchil turned his gaze upwards. Even when he told the truth, Chung Myung just cursed him. This was why Guchil hated helping people.
No, not a chance. I can't believe that. Chung Myung shoved Guchil away and jumped to his feet. I need to go and see for myself. Ha! Guchil shouted at his back. If you don't come back by dinner in the evening, Wang Cho will kill you for real this time. Don't waste your time with needless things and get back to work. But Cho Sam left. What is that bastard going to do now? Guchil shook his head, absolutely baffled by the change in his behavior. Huh? Was this the face of a merchant who had lost his entire fortune? That was certainly what Chung Myung's face looked like. When he thought about it, with all the disciples of Mount Hua killed in the battle with the Heavenly Demon, a decline in power was inevitable. During that time, they could have been pushed out of the great sects. But no matter how hard he racked his brains, how could Mount Hua be pushed out and the Beggars' Union come into the great sects in just 100 years? How did that make sense? How could beggars who knew nothing of martial arts be included? Somehow, the beggar he talked to didn't know. So Chung Myung went asking, but no matter who he grabbed, the results were the same. Mount Hua? Are you talking about the mountains over there? What about it?
Mount Hua Sect. Did Mount Hua have a martial arts school?
I've never heard of such a sect.
How dare a beggar touch my sleeve? Do you want your arms cut off? Let go of my sleeves this instant.
Forget the last one. No one knew. Not a single one. This makes no sense. How did the Mount Hua sect turn out this way? There would always be numerous famous sects, but none would be as renowned as Mount Hua. It would be a bit of an exaggeration to say that all of the most famous swordsmen come from Mount Hua. Still, no one would disagree that Mount Hua was one of the three most famous, along with Udang and Namgung. But people didn't know it existed? There was one positive response at least. Mount Hua Sect. I think I've heard of it. Weren't they famous in the past? From what I heard, they slew the Heavenly Demon and then collapsed. Are they still there? Collapsed? The Mount Hua Sect? What kind of bullshit was he spouting? It would be more realistic to say that the Imperial Palace burned down and the Emperor fled. The Mount Hua Sect has fallen? Mount Hua? Maybe I should be glad it's me who was resurrected. Chung Myung recalled the strange expression Chang Mun-sa-hyung wore in his last moments. If he were alive to hear the news, he would have vomited blood and died again. No. Chung Myung leapt from his seat. I need to see it with my own eyes. The Mount Hua sect had existed for hundreds of years. No matter how horrible a state it was in, he had to see it. I'm going to Mount Hua. His blue eyes blazed with passion. This was the moment the butterfly's wings birthed a tidal wave.
Chapter 3. Guchil was seriously troubled. Chung Myung left the tent screaming at the top of his lungs and then came back into the tent screaming more nonsense. I'm going to Mount Hua. Guchil just stared at him. This may sound absurd, but hear me out. Guchil actually wanted to hear just how absurd it would be. However, that was blown away by Cho Sam's next words. I simply could have left without a word, but I came back to inform you because I know I received some valuable information from you. What a mess. There really wasn't a reason for Guchil to listen to a madman's nonsense, but he stuck around because Cho Sam seemed so serious and he felt bad for him. I will repay kindness twofold and resentment tenfold. There will come a day when I will repay the favor, so remember the name Chung Myung of Mount Hua. We will meet again, and I will repay the favor that I owe you. His words sounded nice, at least. It would have been really cool if Cho Sam wasn't bruised black and blue and dressed like a beggar. Crazy talk. Chung Myung's face fell. I know it sounds strange, but remember my words. One day, they'll change your destiny. Wang Cho is looking for you. You're dead if he catches you. Really? They locked eyes. The world was full of all kinds of people. Someone suddenly reaching new heights wasn't that great or weird in the grand scheme of things. Of course, for it to happen overnight was rather weird and frightening. Well, I need to get going. Come back soon or he really will beat you to death. I'm going. Anyway, just remember, Chung Myung of Mount Hua. Remember that name. With that, Chung Myung boldly stepped away. Guchil shook his head. Life was full of twists and turns, sometimes good and sometimes bad. But if Cho Sam got caught, he really was dead. What am I going to tell Wang Cho? Abruptly, The tent flap was thrown open and Chung Myung walked back inside.
What? Why was he back again?
But Gu Chil didn't get the chance to ask. Yeah.
Huh?
What was that bastard's name?
Who?
The one who hit me.
Ah, Wang Chou? Wang Chou. His real name is Zhongpal.
Zhongpal. Sounds like a real beggar's name, all right. Tell that bastard next time we meet, I won't let him go. In Gu Chil's opinion, Wang Chou was the one who won't let him go. Now, I'm really going. Chung Myung strolled out of the tent, whistling. Just as Gu Chil thought everything was settled, Chung Myung popped back into the tent.
Ah, what now?
Yeah.
What? What now? Why again?
Which way is it to Shaanxi's Mount Hua? No matter how you sliced it, this bastard was definitely crazy. Chung Myung ran and ran. There was not a single person in the world who would take a little beggar with them all the way to the Shaanxi province. Unbelievable. His 2 legs, which were so strong and reliable, felt tired. Even his heart felt weak. Did Chung Myung ever ride a horse or a carriage? Never. He would run much faster than a horse ever could, and he wasn't nearly laid back to slow down on purpose. If you added up all the distance he had ran in his previous life, you could loop the Central Plains 10 times. That was why he'd started running without a second thought. But he hadn't even really stretched his legs before he was flat on the ground. Oh God, I'm gonna die at this rate. He couldn't have even imagined such a weak body existed. His 2 legs had been reduced from steel to sticks and bones, and his untiring heart has reduced to quivers. What nonsense was this? It felt like his heart would just jump out of his mouth at any moment. Ah, what kind of body is this? Did he run for an hour or 2? Just how bad was this young beggar's body? Ugh. The answers were plainly laid out before him. Putting aside his internal energy, his body alone was in quite a state, literally skin and bones, without an ounce of flesh. And he was planning to go to Shaanxi province? A pipe dream. He would kneel over from exhaustion before reaching Mount Hua. If he ever made it to the afterlife, his acquaintances would ridicule him. The Plum Blossom Sword Saint dead from exhaustion? They'd ask. A mocking laugh escaped from Chung Myung's mouth. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't even stand anymore. Martial artists had great bodies, but this one was simply horrible. Chung Myung didn't know if it would collapse from overworking or overthinking, or just plain hunger. He didn't know, so he just laughed. If I'm going to the Shaanxi province, I need to fix this weak body first. But how was he going to change his body? Make it healthy? He already knew the answer. Well, I just need to learn martial arts. A new start. Other people might now realize how incredible a chance this was. Isn't it said that those who fail to reach the top have the most regrets? Well, it was true. Even those who successfully reach the top have their regrets. If only I had done that at that time. If only I'd focused on learning the basics. If only I'd practiced when the master grabbed my ear instead of running away. If only I hadn't gotten caught stealing from the secret alcohol stash. No, forget the last one. Well, I can do it all over again. In the past, Chung Myung was one of the greatest swordsmen in the 3rd generation. However, that didn't mean he was satisfied. Rather, as he got stronger and his understanding of martial arts deepened, he understood better than anyone else just how inefficiently he'd practiced and how flawed his foundation was. Foundation. That damned foundation had cost him his Sahyung and Saje. Chung Myung hated the foundation classes, but he understood why it was so important when he became a disciple. After all, the foundation is what makes a man stand. A tall tower needs a strong foundation. How high the tower rises depends on how the foundation is laid. But young Chung Myung didn't know that. No matter how much his teachers explained, he just didn't understand. Even when he understood it, he couldn't give it his all. Why? Because I'm only human. If I was busy digging to build my foundation, what about the person next to me who'd already built 3 stories? Who wouldn't want to hurry? Besides, they always told me to concentrate on foundation and basics, but when I did, they just praised the ones ahead of me. Fucking power supremacy. He could laugh though. The masters were only human too. Everyone knew great success came from solid foundation. Still, while students struggled with their foundations,
The masters were busy praising the ones with outstanding swordsmanship. That was bearable. Mount Hua taught patience, so that students were quite good at containing their emotions. However, if the masters were to gather for even a single drink after evening practice that day, it's expected that the next foundations training will be no walk in the park. And what if someone starts bragging about their disciples at the drinking party? Everything will be over. The drunks start bragging about their disciples as if they're one of a kind, and those who have nothing to brag about just have to sit there and take it. Then, the next morning, they would take out their frustration on their disciples. My Saja's disciple is already doing second formation of Plum Blossom Sword. That rotten man's disciple apparently already tapped into higher internal energy. Not once have I lost to him, but now I'm losing? Whose fault do you think that is, huh? Answer me! You're not putting in enough effort! Effort! With masters like that, what foundation can be laid? They were too busy trying to show off their students. It was a vicious cycle where Asaja's skill were handed down to the disciples. However, the current Chung Myung was different. There was no need to rush. There was no master egging him on. Now that he'd already seen the path he had to climb, he just had to take it one step at a time. Foundations? Others would dig into flat ground, but Chung Myung would tear down mountains. His tower would stand upon an unconquerable peak. The first step is always important. The danjon and inner chi. In any body, the danjon was weak. As one practices, it becomes stronger and better at holding chi until it can supply the chi for your martial arts. A well-trained danjon could be the deciding fact against other martial artists. Simply put, it's like rolling a snowball. Imagine rolling a small snowball down a mountainside. A finger-sized ball becomes fist-sized and grows exponentially from there. Soon, it's a colossal avalanche no human power can stop. What Chung Myung needed to do was create a solid danjon to hold his chi. That meant he had to find a mountain where the snowball never stops rolling. Alright then, Chung Myung looked around carefully before he began. Making a danjon for the first time was risky. He left town to find somewhere secluded to avoid casualties. It was unlikely someone would get hurt, but why take the risk? Here is good. Chung Myung went into the forest and sat cross-legged under the shade of a large tree. Now, where do I start? There were a lot of things going through his head. All the teachings of Mount Hua, more than a dozen methods of tapping into the chi. There was the self-healing chi, the Plum Blossom Heart method, specific to the Plum Blossom Sword, the internal chi, which would boost one's chi sevenfold, the regulating chi, said to contain all forms of energy. The number of methods in his head would boggle most people. If he decided not to limit himself to the teachings of Mount Hua, Chung Myung could learn so much. Yet, Chung Myung didn't even think about it. He knew what technique he had to learn. Equilibrium of 6. For the first time, Chung Myung's voice was clear and confident. Chapter 4. Equilibrium of 6. The equilibrium of 6 refers to unity. The unity of earth and sky, and the 4 cardinal directions, east, west, north, and south. 6. The equilibrium of 6 is the world, and the world is the equilibrium of 6. It sure had a nice ring to it. So what exactly does that mean in martial arts? It's like one of those worthless items that get tossed out of illegal stores for chump change. It wasn't cheap, but people considered it cheap. It was the cheapest martial arts technique in the world, sold for a price anyone could afford. In short, it's cheap. It was supposed to be the first thing anyone should buy from the bookstore to learn martial arts. Those who don't follow it would end up learning the same thing by self-education. When Chung Myung was very active, the equilibrium of 6, right of deliberation, and the 3 swords were famous. By the time Chung Myung was known as one of the greatest swordsmen of the 3rd generation, the basic technique of martial arts had revolved around Tai Chi. So why was Chung Myung learning this cheap trick now? Because it's not cheap. Equilibrium of 6 was one of the introductory techniques of Mount Hua. All those who entered Mount Hua were instructed on the equilibrium of 6 because it could cleanse anyone's body of impurities. Unfortunately, it didn't make your inner chi stronger. It just made you healthier. Those who didn't understand this despised it as they couldn't attain the results they wanted, and cursed it so badly they wanted it removed from the teachings of Mount Hua. Inevitably, newcomers to the Mount Hua Sect ended up hating the equilibrium of 6.
But Chung Myung knew better. This was no worthless technique. If it was, Chung Myung never would have made it as far as he did 100 years ago. Everything had a purpose. The equilibrium of 6 didn't increase strength nor chi. Honestly, when comparing the efficiency of internal chi techniques, equilibrium was less than 1/10 as effective as other techniques. But equilibrium of 6 was incredible for what it was made to do. The practitioner's body would be perfectly purified. The basis, to put it simply. The foundation, the all-important foundation. It was the best martial arts technique to purify the body, perfect the danjeon, and perfect the body itself. However, the effects were never visible to the naked eyes, as people only noticed their danjeon when using skills. In the end, even Mount Hua gave up teaching the equilibrium of 6. They only taught it in the introductory classes because it was tradition, and even then, only when asked. What a mess. What was the point of trying to run and fly when you're only capable of crawling? In his past, Chung Myung didn't want to cling to a technique that didn't show him results either. 100-fold loss. Damn it! It was his single biggest regret. If only he had completed the equilibrium of 6 instead of switching to a different technique, Chung Myung could have been twice as strong. It was impossible to rebuild your foundation once the tower was built, but thankfully, now he has an opportunity to correct his mistakes. This time, he could complete it with meticulous attention to every detail. His new tower would be even bigger and more beautiful. With a deep breath, Chung Myung closed his eyes and recalled everything he knew of the equilibrium of 6. As he calmed down, his chi moved. With every breath, oxygen filled his body and the chi moved. First-time learners take around 1 month to feel the oxygen moving through their body, but Chung Myung didn't need that time. The energy from the air was guided by the equilibrium of 6 and settled into the lower part of his belly. Now, the real work begins. Chung Myung had no intention of loitering at the basic level of the technique. Following the path laid out wasn't bad, but someone who had already walked the path of martial arts could never be satisfied with such small achievements. A little more. He focused his mind towards filtering out the impurities mixed with the chi. It was like looking at every single thread in a huge bolt of fabric and gently correcting each misaligned thread. It was perfect. To Chung Myung, the quality of gathered chi was irrelevant. What he needed was a one-of-a-kind pure chi. The chi began to fade away. From just the size of a millet seed, it became smaller and smaller and smaller. After over half a day, all that was left was a fine sliver of energy. Anyone else could be embarrassed to call this energy a danjeon. Phew! Chung Myung finally opened his eyes. His face was bathed with sweat. His rags were drenched with sweat and thick dust. He was already dirty, but this was a whole new level. This is my first time doing it with such concentration. Rather than it being tiring and difficult, Chung Myung found it refreshing. He was very pleased with the results, though calling it a danjeon was rather ambiguous. It was weak. If you searched the entire history of martial arts, you couldn't find a weaker danjeon than Chung Myung's. But Chung Myung knew. He had taken the first step towards the perfect foundation. This little danjeon was the gateway to a whole new world. This mote of pure chi would roll like a snowball and create an unstoppable landslide. Right, just like that bastard, the Heavenly Demon. Chung Myung's body tensed. Even thinking about him made chills run down his spine. He wasn't even human. He was overpowering. A group was assembled from the most elite from all the sects. They weren't even after the Heavenly Demon Sect. They only wanted one person, the Heavenly Demon himself. The result? Total annihilation. It was no exaggeration to say that the Heavenly Demon had single-handedly beaten the great sects. Perhaps Chung Myung would be like that this time if he did everything right. Okay. Chung Myung leaped to his feet. He managed to stand halfway before he twisted and fell on his face. Ugh. What? Was he faint from overworking? He propped himself up on his arms, or he tried at least. His arms wouldn't move. Oh! His arms shivered as if they had been struck by lightning. The sight of his bare arms trembling like twigs made him feel pathetic. Why? What now? This shouldn't be happening. When one learns the internal chi, the whole body should have way more energy. Wait a moment. Chung Myung turned his gaze to his lower abdomen. The purest chi in the world was gathered, as small as an ant eye. It was pure enough to satisfy even the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, and it was almost miraculously small. What exactly did that mean? No, damn it! This isn't going to help me use my body right now. How could I forget? Chung Myung clutched his head as he writhed on the ground. He should have thought it through before he created it. Think, Chung Myung, think! His brain was in his head. So why didn't he think? Why didn't he? He could hear Chung Sa-hyung's voice admonishing him. Please think a little. Think. Why don't you use your head when you're doing things for the first time? Why? Your head isn't a decoration. Think. Had he known it would turn out this way, he would have put a little more thought. I need to go to Mount Hua with this body? How far was Mount Hua? Roughly 2,000 miles? His eyes rolled in an instant. 2,000 miles. Any ordinary person would struggle to travel 2,000 miles, but a normal child, no. A beggar with nothing to eat? Ugh. Chung Myung rubbed his face. This rotten life. But what was he supposed to do? He had already created his dungeon. It wasn't like he could have created a bigger dungeon even if he had known. He knew what came from taking shortcuts. No more sacrificing the future for the sake of the present. It was quite a conundrum. Chung Myung sighed and heaved himself up off the ground. What is there to life? All Chung Myung could see were hardships with no end in sight. But hardships forged heroes. There is nothing you can't do with a little persistence. Chung Myung clenched his teeth and hobbled his way to town. Chung Myung collapsed to the ground. There are things that can't be done with persistence either. And what a time to realize it. Chung Myung had realized there was a force that could stop him. His legs hurt, but he could tolerate pain. But there was one thing he couldn't tolerate. I'm hungry. Nothing could solve the hunger raging in his empty stomach. Chung Myung wasn't a stranger to hunger, actually. Practice sometimes required discipline. Eating was an act of accepting external qi, but naturally the food could contain impure qi too. Therefore, those in search of pure qi forbid themselves from eating. There were times when Chung Myung thought of abandoning his training, but he was a true disciple of Mount Hua, and he was immune to hunger. Well, that was what he thought. Chung Myung had never learned the huge gulf between choosing not to do something and not being able to do something. Extreme hunger cannot be overcome with patience. His stomach felt like it was being attacked from the inside. He managed to get out of the forest and into town, but he couldn't do anything more. He had practically crawled his way out of the forest. The first life or death crisis I experienced after being reborn is starvation. It was a whole new level of absurdity for him. Just who was Chung Myung? One of the greatest swordsmen of the third generation. He was tired and hungry. He was convinced death was just around the corner. He tried to gather chi to become a wild beast, but became a worm instead. No. When he thought about it, his body was on the verge of starvation right from the beginning. He had only realized once he was on the brink of death. What do I do now? He needed money to get food, and he needed to work to get money. But working in his current state was impossible. Just then, a rustling sound came from somewhere. Chapter 5. What is that? Chung Myung shook his head to clear his mind, only to find something shiny in front of him. Huh? At the same time, the sound of metal clicking could be heard. He's still so young. How did he end up as a beggar? Clink, clink. Coins started flying towards Chung Myung. It looks like he's been beaten pretty badly. Looks like he'll die soon. Such a terrible world. What a pitiful kid. What? What was happening? That's right. I'm a beggar, aren't I? I forgot for a second. To everyone else, Chung Myung looked like a beggar. No, he was a beggar in his own eyes too. He was a young child who hadn't reached adulthood yet. He was so severely beaten that his eyes were puffy and blue, while blood clotted his open wounds. And such a beggar was lying flat on the street. Ugh! He can't survive without our help. I can't just watch a child suffer like that without help. What sort of person could do such a thing? A raggedy young beggar, with underdeveloped limbs and covered in dust, seemed to be dying. No, it didn't merely look like he was dying. Chung Myung was really dying. How else could such a perfect beggar scene be witnessed from him? Coins kept flying into view, one after another. No matter how I look at him, he's just a beggar. How did he get here? It seemed like the world still had kindness in it. People were clicking their tongues as they passed by Chung Myung before tossing a few coins in his direction. Looking at the coin that came pouring in, Chung Myung couldn't restrain the tears in his eyes.
Oh my, he's crying. Poor thing, it sure is pitiful.
Go and buy yourself some noodles with that money. The warmth was too much. However, the reason why Chung Myung was shedding tears wasn't due to the kindness he received. A disciple of the great Mount Hua Sect has been reduced to begging. How did he fall so low? Until just a few days ago, he was the greatest swordsman in the world. He risked his life and went to battle Chunma, who was about to usher in a new era of chaos. Before that, he was the most elegant swordsman that roamed the world. But now, he was here begging. The world was finding new ways to wound him. I have some pride too. If he accepted the money, then he would truly turn into a beggar. What a beggar he would be. A noble swordsman of the great Mount Hua who earned his living clutching the ankles of others. As if he would actually pick up the money. It was a truly impossible task for Chung Myung. Chung Myung had a warrior's pride. He would never give up. Even when there was a blade about to slit his throat, he refused to bend or break. Chung Myung raised his head while clenching his teeth and shouted,
Thank you so much. You'll be blessed, sir.
His pride was long dead. He had to live. Chung Myung patted his bulging belly. He looked weird like a tadpole with a slim body that held no charm and a convex belly. Self-esteem went to drain with the food. Better to live as a beggar than die. Due to his small stature, he couldn't eat much. Just 3 dumplings were enough to make his stomach bulge out. He still had 3 coins left up his sleeve. Coins that he would have never picked up in his past life looked like treasures in his new life. I would have never thought that money was so important. Chung Myung remembered the words of his Sahyong, who would always hold his head in agony on the last day of each month. Warriors need to be obsessed with wealth. If possible, Chung Myung wanted to go back to those days and ease his Sahyong's suffering. My stomach is actually full. A young beggar was mouthing his complaints off to a ghost. Chung Myung had to keep himself from crying when he thought of his hard-working, money-obsessed Sahyong's final moments in the battle with Chunma. Anyway, first I need to live. Chung Myung scratched his head. He left without a plan and he had no idea how to get to Shangxi. I underestimated how far away 2,000 miles was. Chung Myung began to reflect on his actions. All of his plans revolved around the abilities of his previous body. Even though he knew that his body and the circumstances had changed, it wasn't an easy task to adapt to his new body overnight. In the past, he would have reached Shangxi in half a day. He would have even stopped for a cold drink at an inn beneath Mount Hua. But now, heading to Mount Hua with his deprived body was a risky venture. Even if Chung Myung could defeat any mountain bandits or beasts, there was no way he could overcome hunger. His mind felt burdened as he realized that the journey he expected to be easy turned into an epic journey that could cost him his life he had just regained. But I just can't beg my way to Shangxi. Chung Myung scratched his head, feeling lost. I need to find a way, but I need to understand what I need to find a way. He wasn't aware of it when he first awoke, but 100 years had passed since his era. It was no exaggeration to say that Chung Myung had no idea how the current world worked. But how should he go about finding it? Hey! An average person would take more than 2 months to get to Shangxi. It wouldn't be too strange to believe that. With Chung Myung's frail body, it could take up to half a year to reach Mount Hua. Hey! It was horrifying and frustrating for Chung Myung, who desperately wanted to see Mount Hua's condition with his own eyes. He had to find a way, but right now, not a single thing came to his mind. Hey, you bastard! You deaf or something? Huh? Chung Myung turned his head. What now? He heard everything clearly, but he didn't think that someone would be calling for him. There was no reason why anyone would talk to a beggar. 3 beggars were glaring down at him with ugly faces. They looked like beggars. His current life seemed to be intertwined with beggars in many ways. Me? You! Who else could I be calling? What the hell is wrong with you? The ugly beggar standing in front of Chung Myung spat on the floor. I don't know what hole you crawled out from, but who gave you permission to beg here? Was permission needed to beg? You're still a child, so I'll spare your life. Take out everything you have, including the money you have hidden in your sleeve, and leave this place. The remainder of Chung Myung's limited funds were stashed in his sleeves and in his hands. Chung Myung looked down at his hand. They were the leftovers, the cold dumplings. You have no conscience, you bastards. Take this away. This little bit of food too? What was he supposed to eat? This beggar. Whoa, a beggar was cursing at another beggar for being a beggar. It felt like he was spitting on his own face. Wait a minute. Chung Myung carefully placed the dumplings to the side. He then stood up, stretched his hand forward a couple of times, took a step ahead and then one step behind, and repeated that several times. The beggars who were watching the strange scene rolled their eyes. What are you doing now? Wait just a moment. I'll be done soon. After stretching his arms and legs a couple of more times, Chung Myung got up. It's not entirely perfect, but this should be enough. After his odd routine, Chung Myung had managed to get a sense of distance and understand the length of his reach. Even with his short limbs, he managed to adapt. So, you guys are about to be very upset. I have a grudge against beggars. What? Don't you understand what I'm saying? Well, that's just how the world is. It's messed up. Don't be too pissed off. Just accept it and move on. What is this bastard talking about? Chung Myung cracked his neck. By the way, I can't hit very hard because my body is weak, so you're going to get hit a whole lot to make up for it. This crazy! At that moment, Chung Myung lunged ahead and punched the face of the beggar standing at the front. Ugh! A proper step. A fully extended fist that gathered strength through the gentle rotation of the waist, utilizing strongly grounded legs. Chung Myung's fist slammed right into the beggar's face, and the sound was like slamming a bamboo stick against the wall. Thud. The beggar, who got hit with the unexpected blow, silently collapsed on the spot. Seeing that, Chung Myung smiled. You! Puck! He kicked another beggar. I'm the Plum Blossom Sword Saint of the great Mount Hua, you bastards! At that moment, all his accumulated resentment after reincarnation exploded. Esteemed sir! Does a beggar look like an esteemed sir? Great beggar? Should I hit you again? The beggars who had their asses handed to them whined. Where did this monster come from? It hurts so much that I could die. A couple of hits were all it took for Chung Myung to subdue these beggars. It was shocking that a child knocked out 3 grown adults, and it was clearly a disastrous result for the 3 of them. It's going to take some time to get used to this body. It didn't take much to subdue them, but if he had been in his previous body, he would have turned them into rice cakes with just one finger. But now, he had to kick, run, roll, and even punch to subdue the beggars. One of them kept getting up after every hit, so Chung Myung had to slap him 38 times. That 종팔, 초팔, whatever it was, that bastard should also be taught like this. Just thinking about him made Chung Myung gnash his teeth. If only he had known how short his new limbs were in advance. If only he had the stamina to get up after being beaten, he could have beaten Palcho. He was in a hurry to get back to Mount Hua, so he couldn't even take revenge. One day, however, he would definitely catch that beggar and teach him a lesson. Men! Yes! The 3 beggars jumped up. Sweat trickled down their face. All 3 of them looked at Chung Myung. No matter how I see it, he looks like a beggar who couldn't even lift a bag of rice. This makes no sense. Totally incomprehensible. Small, weak, and thin. On the surface, he looked very weak and frail. No one expected that he could fight so fiercely, so when they got close, they ended up seeing stars. Their fists never even touched Chung Myung's clothes. Chung Myung wasn't very fast or strong, so why did they lose to him? Hey, yes! Please give us your orders, esteemed sir. No, esteemed beggar, no. What's the point in understanding? It takes time to convince someone, but beating them is quick. The only important thing was that the young beggar's punches hurt like hell. Chung Myung glanced at the beggars and opened his mouth. I am just asking, do you know how to reach Shangxi quickly? The beggars looked at each other and smiled. Chung Myung began to feel like there was some hope when he saw their expressions. You're asking something obvious. Oh, really? If we knew something like that, why would we be begging? At least ask something worthwhile. Chung Myung looked at the beggars and sighed deeply. These guys weren't wrong. At the very least, it was his mistake to seek a path from a beggar. Enough. Go away. Thank you. Be strong. The beggars bowed their heads and turned away, ready to run away. No, they tried to run away. Hold it. At that moment, Chung Myung's words froze them in place. Yes? It is fine to flee, but take out everything in your hands and pockets and leave them here. You came up behind me while I was eating. So 1 coin, no, 10 coins. Trust me, it is better than getting hit again. Realizing how sincere he sounded, the beggars relinquished the coins in their pockets and quickly escaped. You. Yes? Take off everything aside from your underwear before I take them off for you. It was a horrific scene where a beggar was being robbed in daylight. Chapter 6. Finally, Chung Myung leaned against the stick he was using as his cane. Finally, the magnificent Mount Hua laid before his eyes. Finally. Tears flowed freely. How hard was it to get here? He brushed shoulders with death so many times and arrived using a child's body, no different from an ordinary, no, less than an ordinary person's body. Of course, it wasn't anything people usually didn't face on their travels, mostly starvation and exhaustion. But that was dangerous too, right? After his terrible ordeals, Chung Myung had finally reached Mount Hua. Finally. If he wrote down his hardships, it would become a hero's epic, or a beggar's epic. Of course, Chung Myung couldn't ignore the wear and tear on his body. Although he had accumulated ki, the energy that should have been used to develop his body was spent walking and running. His body had not gotten stronger at all. The constant grating of his bones made Chung Myung grimace in pain. Even his already ragged clothes had been reduced to scraps on his body, and the dust stuck to them. But that wasn't important. Chung Myung had reached Mount Hua. I'll smash the head of anyone who says being reborn will grant a wonderful life. Who you were reborn as was important. If he was reborn as a beggar without parents or a temple to take him in, he'd rather not be reincarnated. But the suffering ends now. He'd finally reached Mount Hua, so now he would see with his own eyes what the hell happened to Mount Hua. Let's go. Chung Myung vigorously pushed on his stick and started climbing Mount Hua. After a while, Chung Myung, clinging to the cliff slopes, heaved like his lungs were going to burst. What test was this? On this mountain? On this all-important mountain, did it make sense for the path to be like this? He could remember the Shaolin and Wudang sect paths overflowing with incense, but he couldn't see a single person visiting Mount Hua. Chung Myung stared mournfully downwards. Endless cliffs stretched before his sight. Was that an exaggeration? Obviously. Nothing was endless, but he was above the clouds. This crazy mountain was so tall, he had passed the clouds and he still had to walk. This wasn't a road anymore. If this was a road, then the sparrow was a phoenix. Can you call it a road if you can't plant both feet on the ground and have to scrabble forward on your hands and knees? Damn it! What were they thinking building the sect on top of this mountain? Chung Myung wanted to run up and investigate as soon as he had reached Mount Hua, but it didn't seem like he'd get the chance. Sahyung, isn't Mount Hua such an auspicious place? Isn't that peak over there shaped like a sword? It seemed like the sect established itself in a good place. Shit. Damn it. What sword-like peaks? Very sword-like, indeed. The paths to the sect cut his feet like swords. It was said that Mount Hua was the steepest of the 5 mountains. It was only when he could not use martial arts that Chung Myung really understood. I'm really going to die. It wasn't a joke. He was fully convinced his life was at risk. His limbs were already trembling, and he had such a long way to go. And seeing how empty it was, he understood just how badly Mount Hua had suffered. Chung Myung groaned and propped himself against the wall, but he couldn't give up. What was the point if he gave up all the way? If there's a mountain, it's a man's job to climb it and rise again with the persistence and courage. The truth was, going down was more dangerous. Really? Moments later, a hand clawed at the top of the cliff's edge. The dusty white fingertips were frail, yet they lifted the rest of his body. I'm going to die. Chung Myung flopped onto his back, having barely managed to lift his body up. I almost fell. He could see the clouds he'd put far below him. Coming this far as a child deserved a compliment from himself. It didn't go easily. It really didn't go easily. The good news was he didn't have to go down the mountain. All that was left was finding the sect. Let's see. Chung Myung struggled to his feet and looked around. That way, in front of him, was a road leading towards the summit. From a little way along the road, he could see Mount Hua. Chung Myung's small legs pumped. His heart shook. After 100 years, he finally returned to Mount Hua. Of course, it's only been a month since I got here. But let's use 100 years because it sounds cooler. Climbing the hill wasn't difficult at all. His body was completely exhausted, but the thought of reaching Mount Hua gave him strength. The sight of the roof tiles of the main gate filled his eyes with sentiment. River and mountains had changed, but these tiles didn't. The gentle curve still captured the spirit of Mount Hua. Right on those old tiles. Huh? Old? A tile was missing. Chung Myung rubbed his eyes. Was he mistaken? No matter how much he rubbed, the scenery didn't change. With each step closer, the half-destroyed gate became clearer and clearer. Chung Myung ground to a halt. The main gate was the first thing visitors visit, even if the interior was damaged. The front gate was always kept grand and neat. But this was the gate of Mount Hua. Its frugal and pragmatic construction exuded the atmosphere of Mount Hua, and it was at least kept neat. But what am I looking at? The tiles were scattered here and there and graffitied all over. They needed to be replaced, and badly. But the cracked, blackened, unpainted pillars were even more horrifying. Spiderwebs? They had to be removed frequently, so he could understand that. However, it was impossible to understand why they were left where they were so visible. And the fire dragon point? Where did the sign go? The signboard? Where did it go? Didn't the signboard symbolize the sect itself? Where the hell did it go? This gate did not read Great Mount Hua Sect. That was the signboard Sahyoung cleaned every morning. Where did it go? Where? Chung Myung's legs lost strength. He barely staggered to the main gate, but he had no words left.
From what I know, they're in ruins. Mount Hua Sect. I think I've heard of it. Weren't they famous in the past? From what I heard, they slew the Heavenly Demon and then collapsed. Are they still there?
Ruined? Mount Hua? Chung Myung's eyes shook. No. What kind of dog shit is this? Others may despair, but Chung Myung struggled to contain his growing irritation. Mount Hua. Mount Hua destroyed. Damn it. Not something else, but Mount Hua? Mount Hua? Oh, my Mount Hua is ruined. Mount Hua. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't deny reality. Chung Myung, battered and shaken, finally had to admit it. Changmyeon Sahyoung, why did this happen? Why? Why did this happen at all? Ugh, the suffocating silence. Ugh! Mount Hua could actually be destroyed? No matter what he had heard on the way here, he didn't hear a single thing about Mount Hua. He occasionally heard about Wudang, Shaolin, and even the smaller sects, but not a single word about Mount Hua. This is why I told you to act in moderation, Sahyoung.
Yeah, you bastard. Mount Hua is a sect. What is the meaning of warriors stuck in the mountains, prettying themselves up and acting like big people? Those who ignore the difficulties of others have no right to speak about their troubles.
Even then, you should have held back. The elders and disciples, and even the other great disciples, were all killed in that battle. Numerous sects said they had sent their very best, but there was no sect as invested as Mount Hua. The elders who were supposed to lead the sect died, and the disciples who were supposed to succeed them died. All that remained were the youngest disciples who had much to learn and hadn't even mastered the martial arts. Who, then, was supposed to carry the name of the great Mount Hua? Right. He could feel his hopes shatter. He could feel it crumbling like the front gate. Mount Hua was destroyed. Sahyoung, this is why I said that. Didn't I tell you nothing would be left if we blindly followed the rules of the sect? Do you see what happened? How can you face the rest of the sect in the underworld? Oh, you frustrating man! Chung Myung's resentment echoed across the empty mountain. This is crazy. He returned to life after 100 years and found Mount Hua ruined. He fought to protect this, but if this was the result, what were they fighting for? Really? He felt the despair creeping over him. It was then. Who's there? A voice touched his ears.
Chapter 7. Ah! Chung Myung turned his head. There's people. After a month of travel, this was good news. Someone lived in the supposedly ruined Mount Hua. The heavy, damaged wooden door squealed open on its abused hinges. A man in a black uniform stuck his head through the half-open gate. What? A child? Chung Myung was immediately convinced this man was a martial artist. In the last month, he had hardly ever been called a child.
What? A beggar? This beggar?
The beggar is traveling alone.
He's a beggar!
People didn't care if a beggar was old or young. They were beggars just the same. But this man ignored his ragged clothes and dripping sweat and saw him as a child. You came here alone. The middle-aged man looked around puzzled. How did you manage to get up here alone? That... Chung Myung stumbled over his words. I just walked up? He wanted to say that nothing was impossible with persistence, but it didn't seem like that would go well with the current situation. With his skinny body, he would raise suspicion no matter what he said. There was no need to make excuses. The important thing wasn't to explain himself, but to take the lead in the conversation. More importantly, I need to ask you something. Huh? The man's eyes went wide. It was absurd for a child to come here all alone, much less start asking questions. Are you a martial artist of Mount Hua?
How do you know of the name Mount Hua?
Am I right?
Yes, for now.
It isn't too late. Chung Myung heaved a sigh of relief. It must be on the verge of ruins. He could tell that from just a glance. But it wasn't entirely ruined, and that was the critical part. Anyway, the legacy continues. Chung Myung resolved himself. First of all, Mount Hua is...
Come in for now.
Huh? Chung Myung was surprised by the man's kind smile.
The sun is going down.
Oh, right. It was already getting dark.
The nights are cold on Mount Hua. You've already had a long day. If you risk a night outside, you're likely to freeze to death. Going down the mountain right now is unreasonable. This place doesn't accept guests right now, but I can't let someone who knows of Mount Hua go back alone.
Chung Myung's eyes spun. Wasn't this too easy? But thinking about it, there really was no reason for him to be wary of Chung Myung. What could a frail beggar like himself be able to do to be needed to be on guard for?
If no one came with you, and you don't have any other plans, come in. We'll listen to what you have to say later.
Chung Myung was a little dazed, like something was swelling inside him. Hardly any traces of the great sword sect Mount Hua lingered, but the fires of their Tao which sustained the mighty sect were yet to be extinguished. Right, that's good enough. What was the meaning of making a name for yourself with a sword? Even before they took up the sword, Mount Hua was famous for their Tao. As long as their Tao continued, Mount Hua was still alive. Then I will trouble you tonight. Chung Myung bowed his head.
Come in.
The man ushered him in with a smile. Yes, before that Chung Myung paused. How should he introduce himself? Whatever. He wouldn't suspect anything, would he? I am Chung Myung. If it isn't too rude, may I know the name of this master?
Chung Myung, huh? Such a good name. I am Eunam.
The Un lineage. Chung Myung's eyes twinkled. It seems that the lineages have already gone through a cycle. If it is the Un line, then would that make this man my great-grand disciple? The names given to the disciples of Mount Hua follow the cycle of Chung, Myung, Hyun, Un, Baek. When the cycle reaches the Baek line, it will cycle back to Chung. This means that it had already been 4 generations since the Taoist Chung Myung was alive. Then he would have never seen me. The last disciples of Mount Hua to see Chung Myung were of the Hyun line. At that time, the Hyun line was the 3rd generation disciples, so this Taoist named Eunam wouldn't have seen the Chung Myung of the past. It felt like so many years had passed since he had walked through these gates. Chung Myung had been brought to Mount Hua by his Sahyong when he couldn't even climb the mountain on his own. And now he'd come back of his own accord. He had to take a deep breath. Considering what they'd left behind on Mount Hua and the circumstances of his return, it wasn't strange for Mount Hua to be bare. No, on the contrary, it was expected, and it wasn't the fault of the current people. It wasn't their fault their seniors had been wiped out while they were still children. In other words, Chung Myung had no right to direct his anger at these people. He should be sorry, if anything. If Chung Myung had been in the same situation, would he have struggled to protect Mount Hua? He could have left it behind and gone to the Wudang sect. Wasn't that just common sense? Right. By what qualifications can I chastise these children? He was ashamed. No matter what else happened, he had to take responsibility. Phew. Chung Myung finally walked inside. Chung Myung had nurtured his sword in the vast hall, the cracked floor and the bluish-white stone. Huh? He rubbed his eyes. Jaded marble. The whitish jaded... No, where did it go? Why was the ground covered in mud? Sahyong was dissatisfied by the muddy floor just beyond the main gate and decorated it with expensive jaded marble. Despite being damaged by their constant practice, he never removed it. So where did all those stones disappear to? Was the current sect leader just more pragmatic than Chung Myung? He could feel a headache coming. Let's stay calm. Calm and calmer. What was the point of getting worked up over some blue stones? Right, they're just stones. No matter how expensive they were just blue chunks of rocks. Even if Chung Myung harassed the disciples for scarring it, it was still just a stone. People are born and so are stones. Stones are born and so are people. People and stones come and go. Anyway, maybe it was sold. It was more important for Mount Hua to survive than protect the stones. Yeah, that was more important. Let's just stay calm. Chung Myung took slow, deep breaths. Thanks to those who kept the Mount Hua alive by selling those stones. Huh? Where did the Heavenly Golden Palace go? I can't see it. What the hell? The Heavenly Golden Palace was a building, not a living thing. It couldn't just run away, right? But no matter how hard he looked, the Heavenly Golden Palace was replaced by barren ground. There. Chung Myung raised his trembling finger to where the Heavenly Golden Palace should have been. The land there seems strange. Was anything over there? It seems you have good eyes. There was originally a palace in that space. There was? Where did it go? It isn't a story a young one like you should hear. Tell me. I know this place better than you. I guess it's a wound of glory. It's embarrassing to say it as a martial artist. Glory my ass. Huh? Nothing. Chung Myung was at a loss. The blue stones were gone. The signboard was gone. And the best place in the sect was gone. Wherever the wind blew, it found dust. This is Mount Hua? This? He would have believed it if you told him it belonged to those rotten bastards in the demonic cult. Oh! Are you okay? Nothing. No, it's nothing. Nothing at all. Every time he inhaled, however, he seemed to catch mouthfuls of dust. It's a little... It seems a little desolate. Unam smiled sadly, a bittersweet expression that hurt Chung Myung. Right, of course it would be like that. The people who protected Mount Hua, like Unam, were the ones who suffered the most after its collapse. If they had the ability, they wouldn't have let Mount Hua decline like this. If they hadn't been loyal, would they have stayed even as it fell to ruins? You must have suffered a lot. Just the thought of it weighed heavily in his heart. No matter how hard Chung Myung was taking it, it was nothing compared to the sorrow of those who protected it all this time. Come here. Yes. When a guest comes, it is right to give them a place to rest. However, Mount Hua is a sect, and there is a law that guests must follow. I understand you might want to rest, but you must first pay your respects. Chung Myung nodded obediently. Unam brought him to a place similar to a shrine. Although there were several temples of significance on Mount Hua, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Ukchon Temple was the most important. Chung Myung didn't abandon the teachings of Mount Hua, so it was only right to enter and pray. In these trying times, he was grateful that Unam had proposed. And yet, he wasn't ready to see the inside of the temple. The entirety of Mount Hua was in ruins. Could the temple be any different? Let's not be shocked. He took a bracing breath. This way. Yes. Chung Myung gathered himself and stepped into the temple, and then stopped. Ukchon was diminished. All he could see was a portrait, an incense burner, and some small objects. So frugal. Frugal. Chung Myung groaned and shook. Where were the golden candlesticks gifted from the Jin Emperor? Where were the golden scrolls inscribed with the ancestors' words? But that wasn't what surprised Chung Myung the most. No way. No. Where did it go? Chung Myung barely managed to raise his trembling finger towards the front. Huh? There should be a flower, right? A flower? Yes, a flower. How did you know that? It was right there. Where did the flower go? Unam tilted his head quizzically. There were many things he wanted to ask this child, but his contorted face begged him to answer. Right. There was one there. A plum blossom made of a strange white metal. Yes, that flower. Where did it go? Sold it. Huh? It wasn't particularly useful and didn't fit well with the sect atmosphere. And there was a merchant who wanted to buy it, so we sold it for a good price. Sold? Right, but you... what? Chung Myung's eyes rolled crazily. The white, fragrant plum blossom, along with the divine sword of violet dawn. It was one of the 2 sacred items of the sect. It didn't glitter like gold or shine like silver, yet it was said to contain the very essence of Mount Hua. And these people sold it. There are other things to sell, but you sold it? You idiots! The combination of shock and fatigue finally won over him, sending Chung Myung toppling to the ground. He could almost see Jangmun Sa-hyung's terrified figure. Ruined. Mount Hua was ruined, completely ruined. Sa-hyung! Chung Myung passed out.
Chapter 8. Elder Hyunjung of Mount Hua gave Eunam a confused look. You mean he came up here alone?
Yes.
And then he fainted inside Okchon Temple.
It seemed like he couldn't even eat properly, but since he climbed up Mount Hua by himself, it's natural for him to be exhausted.
I guess so. Hyunjung smiled. The ruggedness of Mount Hua made it difficult enough for an adult to climb. The strain it would place on a child would be indescribable. Where is that child now?
I moved him to the Plum Blossom Hall. I also called Eunjin to check on him, and he said there was no problem other than fatigue.
That's good. Hyunjung nodded. Whatever his circumstances, the kid was a guest of Mount Hua now. But it's strange for a child to climb up here alone. Is there no story behind it?
After the visit to Ukchon, I was going to ask him, but as you know, he fainted and I couldn't ask.
I see.
But...
Eunam frowned and explained the plum blossom to Hyunjung. You sold them? Hyunjung tilted his head quizzically.
Yes.
He said that and then fainted. The elder stroked his beard.
Of course I could have heard it wrong, but it is a long story. That wasn't the only weird thing. Before I could ask him anything, he asked me if I was a martial artist of Mount Hua. Doesn't that mean he came to join?
Yes.
I wonder what he was planning.
Are you worried? Hyunjung chuckled at Eunam.
It isn't like that.
What is so strange about knowing where Mount Hua is? This sect left its mark on history. It's no wonder people would remember it.
Right.
And he could be a descendant of a Mount Hua member. Ah. Eunam nodded. As they were pushed out of the great sects, many people had left Mount Hua. Few had remained to share their fate to the end. If this kid descended from one of them, they would find out. If you're worried he's here to steal something, what is there left to steal?
Sect leader.
Eunam's face fell. However, Hyunjung didn't see that. Sold it. Hyunjung shook his head and smiled. Right. Maybe he descended from a former member, since he seems to know what Okchon Temple used to be. It must have been embarrassing for the child.
Sect leader.
Enough. It's true that we sold it. There's nothing to be ashamed of.
Maybe it's better not to tell him.
Eunam gulped. He wasn't telling him everything the boy had said. You sold it, you idiots! He wondered how the sect leader would react to those words. Right. Bring him to me as soon as he wakes up.
Yes, sect leader.
Hyunjung lost himself to his thoughts. Sold it. It felt like salt being sprinkled on his wounds. The ancestors will never forgive me. No matter how much he wanted to save Mount Hua, how could he face his ancestors after selling the very history of Mount Hua? It hurted to think about. The name of Mount Hua should not end in my time. Hyunjung's face darkened. It wouldn't happen, not even in his dreams. He worked day and night to keep Mount Hua afloat, but with each day, his hope waned. Eunam quietly stood up. I'll take my leave.
Ah.
Eunam stopped, just as he was about to leave.
Sect leader. If that child wants to join, what do you plan to do?
Join. Mount Hua didn't accept disciples anymore. However, it would be different if they were a descendant of one of the previous disciples. It won't happen. Hyunjung nodded firmly.
I understand.
Wait.
Yes, sect leader.
What's that child's name?
Chung Myung. It's Chung Myung.
Chung Myung. Hyunjung's expression darkened. Okay, you can go.
Yes.
Chung Myung. He had the same name as one of the Mount Hua swordsmen. Weird. It was definitely weird. If only he were still alive. If only the famous Plum Blossom Sword Saint had survived that bloodbath, the fate of Mount Hua would have been much different. It was a meaningless daydream, but Hyunjung couldn't help himself. So much debt. Hyunjung felt so alone. You damn bastards! Chung Myung spat curses. You had nothing else, so you sold it? It was maddening. Even if they were starving to death, those weren't things they should sell. No matter how shabby it looked, the disciples were dead. The young kids would have known nothing. Right. But even if Mount Hua was destroyed, those couldn't be sold. No, this is better than being ruined. If the ancestors had seen Chung Myung, they would have scolded him. No martial artist should be obsessed with material things. He knew that. He knew it well. Shit! Chung Myung groaned. He looked down at the mountain range. Whenever he'd felt frustrated, he would climb another mountain and look at Mount Hua. When he saw the endless peaks rising through the clouds like swords, his spirits rose. But now... shit. Everything was bad. It was all inside out. It felt like his stomach rotted whenever he saw something missing. The sect really has declined. Really. It was more like collapsed than declined. Anything of value was sold. That means practically everything in Mount Hua. No doubt, Ukchon was the last place they touched. After he saw Ukchon Temple, he could understand why this place was so run down. They were so destitute, they'd pull up the blue stones and sold them. Right. I understand everything. Everything is fine, but this... why are the martial arts so crooked? Chung Myung rolled around the floor outside the hall. He would die if he fell off, but Chung Myung didn't have the time to think about it. That old man, not even a third-rate disciple? Talk about fate. Under normal circumstances, Chung Myung wouldn't even be able to guess the level of Eunam. No matter how strong he used to be, he was nothing more than a kid now. However, Chung Myung could clearly see Eunam's level of martial arts. His senses weren't strong. Eunam was just too weak. When Chung Myung was at his prime, Eunam wouldn't have even qualified as a student. What am I supposed to do? He didn't even know where to start. He knew he should start from the bottom, but it was too deep for Chung Myung to see. But isn't this Mount Hua? Do I tell them that I'm Chung Myung? They would curse him, no doubt. If he was lucky, they wouldn't beat him before they kicked him out. Chung Myung wouldn't believe himself either. But let's say they did believe him. Assume the man was infinitely patient and asked him to prove it was his martial arts. I don't have the strength. Chung Myung was like a walking treasure. He had all the knowledge to revive the sect, but not the power to protect himself. Chung Myung knew not everyone was as wonderful as Sahyung. What if one of them didn't like Chung Myung and decided to take him out? His second life would be stolen just like that. That's no good either. Then I'll have to revive the sect without revealing my identity, or at least hide it until he had the means to protect himself. It would be easier to fight the demonic sect. He spat out a laugh. He had to teach martial arts to save Mount Hua and himself. He wanted to start hitting people, but if I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have run over here. He owes Mount Hua. The only reason he could walk around saying he was the best swordsman in the world was because of Mount Hua. Yet he'd given nothing back to Mount Hua, only the honor of defeating the Heavenly Demon. Thanks to that, Mount Hua was on the edge of destruction. How could he ignore Mount Hua? He couldn't. Oh, Sahyung. Chung Myung shook his head regretfully. Up in the blue sky, he could see Jangmun Sahyung smiling down at him. Still, it's Mount Hua. Ugh. Chung Myung heaved himself up. He didn't want Sahyung to murder him in the afterlife. He had to make himself useful to Mount Hua. Damn it. Who said anything would be impossible in this world? When he'd first started learning martial arts at Mount Hua, who would have imagined he would become a great master? Everyone had thought they would be lucky if he didn't cause trouble. Chung Myung overcame their cold eyes and became famous in Mount Hua. Challenging the impossible was his specialty. I will make it the best in Murim. Chung Myung's eyes glowed with passion. And at that moment, everyone in Mount Hua shivered suddenly. Chapter 9. Where did you go? I was looking around. Looking around? Eunam eyed Chung Myung suspiciously. However, Chung Myung crossed his legs and turned to gaze at the sky as if he didn't mind at all. Was this child always like this? The first time he saw the kid, he'd seem extremely polite. Now it seemed like his behavior had changed. How should he put it? He was full of bad energy. Well, he must be. Judging from his behavior, the kid must have been a beggar for quite some time. Expecting innocence from a beggar in this world would be naive. Have you eaten? I'm not hungry. Chung Myung was being sincere, ironically. The condition of Mount Hua stole away his appetite. How could he overcome the emptiness he felt from looking at this place? Then follow me. Huh? The sect leader wants to see you. Ah, yes. Chung Myung nodded. He had to do this eventually. Better sooner than later. The door opened to reveal an old man sitting quietly. Chung Myung was shaken. He certainly deserves to be called sect leader. The feeling of chi was enough to convince him
that this man had devoted his entire life to this place. But he doesn't seem to have dominance. As a sect leader, he didn't lack for anything, but he was lacking as a warrior of Mount Hua.
Give your greetings.
Is there anywhere as unhappy as this? Chung Myung sighed. After all he'd been through, this sect leader seemed like a toddler compared to the sect leader of his time. Here was the Plum Blossom Sword Saint offering his greetings to a toddler. I shouldn't have been reborn. What was he supposed to do? Get sick and die? Chung Myung didn't voice any of his thoughts and just bowed. I am Chung Myung. I am Hyunjong. The sect leader smiled and returned a simple greeting. A guest has arrived, but we have nothing to treat you with. I hope you can understand our current situation. Ah, yes. Hyunjong's eyebrows twitched. Usually you would reply, don't worry, or something like, how could an uninvited guest expect much? But the look in his eyes and his gestures indicated this child didn't seem to expect much from them in the first place. I heard you said something interesting in Nokchon Temple. Sold it. What are you talking about? Chung Myung tilted his head. Hyunjong narrowed his eyes, but it really seemed like he didn't understand what was being asked. He really doesn't know. A child couldn't lie so well. No use trying to read me, you jerk. Chung Myung smiled to himself. He was Chung Myung, one of the best liars in the world. Even his Sahyung couldn't see through his eyes or find his alcohol. Hyunjong simply couldn't find any evidence that the child was lying. Did you not say such words? I don't remember well. The only thing I remember was being so tired I fainted. Made sense. He'd climbed Mount Hua with his young body. The kid must have reached his limits. However, if you were that tired, why didn't you say anything? It is said that when entering the gate, it is necessary to pay tribute to the ancestors. Hyunjong raised his eyebrow at Eunam. The child came here all alone, and you dragged him off to make him pray? Huh? Eunam blinked. No, he was perfectly fine. The kid was perfectly fine until he entered the gate, and then he passed out from exhaustion? What kind of crazy story is that? Eunam shot Chung Myung an accusatory look, but Chung Myung's eyes were wide and innocent. Hyunjong nodded. That sounds reasonable. Apologies for our inattention. It's fine. Right. Another question. Yes? Why did you climb all the way up this steep mountain? Don't say you came here on a whim. Mount Hua isn't something people climb for novelty, much less a child. A sharp question, but Chung Myung had his answer prepared in advance. Sect leader. I'm listening. I want to enter the Mount Hua Sect. You want to enter? Hyunjong's eyes narrowed. Yes. Hyunjong stared at Chung Myung. He couldn't see anything from his innocent eyes. Does that mean you climbed up here with a purpose? Yes. Hyunjong nodded. Mount Hua wasn't a place for tourists. You want to enter Mount Hua. This means you know of Mount Hua. Yes. Enter. Hyunjong's eyes narrowed. Chung Myung licked his lips. It's perfectly logical. I'll just use Chongjin. Chung Myung's Saje, his junior, Chongjin, was chased by the demonic sect as he was preparing for the final battle. Though it's said that he disappeared, a person who disappeared during battle wasn't missing, but dead. Chongjin fell off a cliff. A woodcutter found him and helped him heal. However, the injury was too severe for him to ever fully recover. As gratitude, he took the man as his disciple and taught him the martial arts of Mount Hua. And I, Chung Myung, is the descendant of that woodcutter. Superb. A flawless script. The best thing was that Chung Myung had control of everything he said. This story had no loopholes, and he was guaranteed to be accepted as a member of the sect. Even if I won't get the same fame as in the past, he would at least be treated well, even if they didn't think too kindly of him. Now ask me the reason. And then he would unfurl his script. It would be a breeze from, I accept. Yes, of course. The entry, what? Chung Myung boggled at Hyunjong. Contrary to his expectations, the sect leader just nodded at him. If you want to join, we should let you. Huh? No, wait. Was it so easy to gain entry into this place? A totally unfamiliar child?
Jangmun,
Eunam was equally shocked.
didn't you say we won't accept new students?
Yes, ask him. I changed my mind, Hyunjong grinned. Truthfully, we aren't in a position to accept new students, but we cannot turn our backs on a child who came all this way knowing about Mount Hua.
Huh, but...
Unam,
Yes, Jangmun.
things go round and round. Whatever the child is, he came to us on his own 2 feet knowing of Mount Hua. Are we going to kick out those who searched us out just because we aren't as great as we were in the past?
If someone heard this, they might have been impressed. However, after all of Chung Myung's preparations, it was just making his skin crawl. What is this? Aren't they supposed to be suspicious of someone they don't know? How did he even become a sect leader? No, he must have become a sect leader because he was like this. No. Before that,
It's fine.
Hyunjung shook his head firmly.
It doesn't matter what kind of life you lived before this. Whether you were a sinner or a thief, the moment you climbed up Mount Hua, your past disappears.
Of course it did, but it couldn't be that simple. No.
I told you it was fine.
Man, it isn't okay. Listen to me.
Unam,
Jangmun.
give this child a place to stay.
Yes.
Your name is Chung Myung.
Chung Myung nodded.
A very nice name. A very good name. Chung Myung of the Chung lineage.
The sect leader chuckled.
This must be fate too. You don't need to get a new name for him. You might not know, but your name means a lot in Mount Hua.
Hyunjung's eyes narrowed.
Would anyone be worthy enough for that name?
Yes, Chung Myung replied.
I'll see.
Chung Myung stood stiffly, and Unam escorted him away with a sullen expression.
This way.
The landscapes of Mount Hua caught his eyes as he stepped outside.
I've entered.
Unam interrupted his thoughts.
Although we haven't held the introduction ceremony, but from this moment on, you are a disciple of Mount Hua. You will become a vessel for the martial arts and the youngest disciple of Mount Hua.
Youngest? Chung Myung's eyes trembled. Youngest? Me? The Plum Blossom Sword Saint? Chung Myung, the youngest? When Chung Myung's amusement leaked, Unam couldn't help but smile.
You seem happy.
Yes, so happy. But why were tears falling?
Shit.
Chapter 10.
The child.
I sent him to the dorms. I think we can just proceed with the ceremony right away.
I see.
Unam stared at his feet. Hyunjung, seeing that, gently smiled.
You don't seem to like this.
Rather than not like, Unam hesitated a little, then opened his lips with a sigh. Jangmun, I just don't seem to understand the meaning of your actions. Why was the child taken in? Now is the time for us to reduce the mouths we need to feed.
Yes, that's true.
And he isn't just some child, but one who doesn't even have a talent for martial arts. Above all, I don't even feel a single ounce of kindness from him. The child doesn't seem to fit the standards of our sect. So why bring in such a child into our Mount Hua? At Unam's points, Hyunjung smiled.
You think so?
Jangmun. Unam took a deep breath. Sometimes this old man was confusing. I can never understand him. Even after assisting this man for over 10 years, Unam still couldn't understand him. Hyunjung's thoughts were too deep for him to understand.
Unama.
Yes, Jangmun.
Sometimes relationships come unexpectedly.
Hyunjung smiled brightly.
Maybe that child could turn into a light for Mount Hua.
That child is too young to be the light of Mount Hua.
He could be.
Hyunjung's face darkened. The current state of Mount Hua was similar to a wind chime. Holding itself up was hard, and no one would bat an eye if it fell. That was the reason why Unam didn't want Chung Myung to join. How much sadness would Chung Myung feel if he was left alone right after joining? How would he feel suffering so much to get here only to be pushed back onto the streets?
I know the situation is difficult.
Hyunjung opened his mouth.
But Unama, plum blossoms are bound to bloom even in snow. The plum blossoms in the harsh cold are bound to give off a sweeter scent than normally brought plum blossoms. If we don't plant seeds just because the winter has come, won't that mean that the possibility of plum blossoms in snow will disappear?
Yes.
Right. So go and see.
As Unam quietly closed the door, he shook his head as he sighed. Each time he talked with Hyunjung, he felt like his heart was being ripped open. However, as of today,
Even after talking with Hyunjung, his heart didn't feel refreshed. At Hyunjung's words, his thoughts still stayed and his mind was still fuzzy because of the current situation of Mount Hua. The current Mount Hua couldn't be saved. Hyunjung worked hard all his life, but the situation just kept getting worse. If things went on like this, they wouldn't last another year. Whenever he thought of Mount Hua, which had such a valiant history, was coming to an end, his heart would ache. Where is our Mount Hua heading? Eunam closed his eyes. Chung Myung blankly lowered his head, looking at the clothes he was wearing. A white robe which caught his eyes. Looking at the 5-petal plum blossoms engraved near the chest, he felt strange. It made his entire body tickle. No, this is really itching me. The material of the clothes was so bad that each time it touched his skin, it felt like it was grating on his skin. If he hadn't experienced those rags on before, wearing this would have troubled him even more. The month of living as a beggar seemed to have helped him. Chung Myung frowned. It's changed. In the past, Mount Hua wasn't a clan with money overflowing like the Wudang sect or Shaolin, but still it had enormous wealth hidden inside. Of course, he couldn't spend the money to his heart's content because of his Sahyung, whose greed for money never let anyone touch it. At the very least, he would dress the disciples of the sect with nice clothes and feed them good things. But the clothes were all ragged now. What did these people do with all that money? There must be heaps of money in that safe. No, forget the safe. They even sold off the historically important items inside the sect for money. So why were they dressing the kids like this? Not able to dress them properly, not able to teach them properly. Doesn't this mean that they just wasted all the money they got? Chung Myung took a deep breath. There is no such thing as a straight walking path. The more he thought about it, the more his head hurt. Expectations only led to disappointment. Anyway, I've joined. He managed to join. The worst disaster happened, in which he ended up being the youngest of Mount Hua. This wasn't what Chung Myung wanted, but at least he managed to enter the sect. There are a lot of problems which will have to be solved, but isn't this just the first step in a 1,000 miles path? No matter how difficult the task is, there is nothing that cannot be done if it is tackled one step after another. Most things in the world can be solved like this. But where is this place? That was the problem. Where Chung Myung was located now was a hall in the past. However, it was changed in the meantime. The past appearance of the hall was turned into a dorm. If Chung Myung's memory hadn't failed him, there was no concept of accommodation in Mount Hua. Those who were newly admitted into the sect would start living with their master. Then what was he doing now? I can't see this as the place where I stayed before I entered the wings of another master. No matter how he looked at it, it was a place made for the sake of humans to live. Am I the only one here? Chung Myung came out of his room. The rooms were lined side by side around the narrow hallway. It was different from the appearance of the past. Chung Myung opened the door to the next room, and it showed clothes and other items in it. Is someone staying here? Chung Myung tilted his head. Who would dare to live in such a messed up room? Who are you? Chung Myung turned his head. Oh my! He didn't even notice that someone was approaching him. He had made a mistake. I forgot I don't have martial arts now. Even though he came to Mount Hua, he didn't learn martial arts yet. Thanks to that, only his body got stronger after ki cultivation, which was the foundation. Realistically speaking, the only thing he could do right now was gather the internal ki, which was as small as a fingernail, which meant it was impossible to be anywhere close to where he was in the past. Who are you, bastard? Spying in on someone else's room? A thief? A rough mouth. A child who seemed to be the same age as Chung Myung. As the child yelled, more kids rushed out. What? Jogul, what is it? The child called Jogul pointed to Chung Myung. This jerk was spying into my room. Who is he? Looks like a newcomer. Chung Myung looked at the ceiling. Why did I have to come back alive? Was it to witness such a cruel situation? It was heartbreaking to see the young people point fingers at him and call him whatnot. In terms of age, Chung Myung was their great-grandfather. Of course, they couldn't possibly know that. But how should he reconcile the meek and disciplined students of Mount Hua to the current disciples who were using their mouths like neighborhood gangs? As he opened his mouth to speak to the guy with messy hair. What's happening? Teacher Ungom. At the low voice from behind, the kids began to move left and right, and a huge person came down the stairs. clumsiness which reflected on his face and gestures, and it was evident that this kid hurt not a single person till now. As he was called, Eungom glanced around with his sharp sword-like eyes befitting his name.
Why are you all making a fuss during your training time? Who said it was fine for you to do this?
No, it isn't like that. My uniform was dirty, so I came to get a change of clothes.
How dare you give excuses?
I apologize. The frightened children all backed up a step. In the meantime, they all looked at Chung Myung.
And you are?
Chung Myung.
You must be the new member of the White Plum Blossom boarding house.
White Plum Blossom boarding house?
This is the White Plum Blossom boarding house. These are the dorms where the disciples of Mount Hua live. Didn't you hear about it?
Dormitory?
The man frowned. Don't you know that you should speak in a respectful manner?
Ah, yes, I apologize. Calm down. Damn it. Once again, he didn't think it through. The children who hadn't even entered Mount Hua during this time would be masters now. This is so messed up. To have the position of a teacher, this man must be really skilled. He was sure that he would be forced to work for his life here.
You too, come along.
Yes?
Whether you are late or early, you need to practice. It wouldn't make any difference. It is the job of a disciple to never waste time in vain.
Chung Myung couldn't help but agree to the statement. In order to change the terrible situation, Chung Myung had to strengthen himself even a day sooner. For that, an environment where he could focus on training was necessary. The problem was what they were trying to teach him would be basic martial arts, which are useless to Chung Myung.
Come.
The man left first. The children followed after him. However, one of them turned back. It was Jogul. I'll see you tonight. I'll fix that head of yours. Right. Don't bother thinking about running away. Sure, come.
You really are. What are you doing?
The child, startled by the shout of Eungom, responded. I'm coming, teacher. Seeing the child run ahead, Chung Myung sighed. I need to treat them well. They were all descendants of the sect. Of course, the way Chung Myung showed favor to the kids would be different from others. They deserve it. Chung Myung smiled as he moved.